What's up, guys? Josh Weidman here with Lazy Landlord, episode number 7. Thanks so much for joining me today. Today's topic is what you need to know before you buy your first investment property. So if you are new to the real estate investment game and you've been thinking about buying your first property, there's a couple key factors that you have to take in consideration before you do anything, all right? So first and foremost, let's start with the end in mind. The first thing that you got to define is your goal for the investment. Number one, define your goals. So this has a couple different facets. Now, some people are most interested in protecting their money. You know, there are some people that they've got a pile of cash that they just want to make sure that it doesn't lose value, that it's going to keep pace with inflation. That's a different type of investment than if you're looking for cash flow or if you're looking for equity in a property. And so depending on what you're trying to accomplish, it's going to determine what kind of properties you're going to try to pursue, what kind of deals you're going to try to get into. Okay, that's the first thing. Along with the goal is also kind of taking a look at the assets that you have available. Do you have a lot of cash? Do you have good credit? Maybe you have some knowledge in construction, or if you're a contractor, maybe you can do some work on the property. You got to kind of take a look at what you can bring to the table for this transaction. If you've never bought a property before, you don't really know where to start, you've got a little bit of money to put down, that's one type of situation. If you've been doing some research and you know a lot about your market, you're in the real estate game, or that's something completely different. So you got to kind of take a look at where you are and look at the goals that you want to accomplish from this investment. That's number one. Number two, you got to learn your market. All real estate is local. Whether you are investing in your backyard, you're investing in a city that's not real close, but within driving distance, or you're investing halfway across the world, you need to know the market where you're investing in. You've got to have a knowledge base of what houses are selling for, what's the difference between a house that sells for $200,000 and one that sells for $100,000 in the same market. A good way to do this is to go on sites like Zillow and Trulia. Now, they're not going to give you the whole picture, but they're going to give you a cross-section of different types of properties. And what I try to do when I'm looking at a different market or a different neighborhood is I'm going to look at prices that sold on the lower end of the pricing spectrum, prices that sold on the higher end, and then prices that are very similar. And what's the difference? If there's a $5,000 or $10,000 price point difference in the value of a home or the sales price of a home, why did this house get $240 and this one got $220? What's the $20,000 difference? Is it the finishes in the property, or this one has a deck, or this one has a finished basement, or there's a bonus room or a jacuzzi tub? Whatever it is, I try to identify the factors that are important when getting into these investments. One thing that you'll find a lot of times is that the different types of homes, different styles of homes are more attractive to an end buyer, oftentimes to a tenant. As for instance, in Philadelphia, we have a lot of row homes, right? A 4-bedroom house oftentimes is more attractive. If we have an extra half bath or a finished basement or a bonus room or a deck, that oftentimes can mean the difference of tens of thousands of dollars in the value of that property. You get into the suburbs, and if you're comparing a colonial with a Cape Cod or a split level, there can be some big differences in the sales price and the desirability of those type of homes. So the second key that you're going to need to focus in on before you start buying your first rental is to learn your market. Understand what are the important factors in determining the value of the home, determining what the rental rates are, what's the most attractive, what kind of vacancy rates, if you're going to be renting this place out, what kind of vacancy rates can you expect? How long does it take to place a tenant? You got to learn the market and know why you're investing and have all the facts. Number 3, know your income and expenses. I touched on this just a second ago about knowing your rents. So there are there's a myriad of different things that go into getting a good rental rate for a property. A good way to analyze what you can get for rents, a nice tool, is rentometer.com. You can go on there and get an idea. Now it's not foolproof, it's not necessarily going to be exactly what you're going to get, but it'll give you an idea or a range what you can expect on the rental rates. This will give you a jumping off point. When you're making your calculations, we're going to get to this in a second, make sure that you're being fairly conservative. If the median rent in a neighborhood is $1,200 and the high end is $1,500 and the low end is $900, maybe you say, okay, I'm going to budget $1,000 a month rent. Then if you get that $1,200 or $1,300 or $1,400, you're in great situation. Whereas if you're budgeting for $1,400 and you get $1,200, that's not so great. All right, so you got to know your numbers for income. And then expenses. This is a big one. This is a place that a lot of people fool themselves when they're getting into their first investment property. They look at their expenses and they say, okay, I've got taxes and insurance and everything else is profit. Wrong. Even if you're buying a fully renovated property, there's going to be additional expenses throughout the life of that property that you have to account for. If you're buying in Philadelphia and a lot of other municipalities, you're going to have to account for an annual rental license that you're going to have to pay. That's an expense. You got to put it in your calculations. Number two, if you're leasing the property, even if you're doing it yourself, you have to account for the cost of leasing that house. There's going to be advertising, there's going to be time spent showing the property, there's going to be costs to screen tenants and do background checks. All of these things have to go into your calculation. If you're hiring a professional to do it for you, which I would highly recommend, especially if you're just getting started, it's going to cost you about 1 month's rent to find a tenant. Sometimes it's a little bit more than that. Sometimes you can get a discount. But at the end of the day, you have to calculate the cost of leasing the property. In addition, you've got maintenance. You're going to have maintenance on the property, even if it's very, very minimal. You should budget at least 5% every year towards maintenance expenses. Hey, I've got a tenant right now. She's moving out. She's been in the property for 10 years, and I've had 3 service calls in 10 years. It's not cost me $1,000 in maintenance over that entire time. Guess what? When she moves out, it's going to cost me a couple $1,000s to get that house ready because there's just been deferred maintenance. You've got some expenses that you're going to have to pay. Okay? So budget for it every year, and if you don't spend it in year 1, 2, 3, or up through year 10, when that tenant moves out, you're probably going to have to invest it in the property to bring it up to par. Some other expenses that you can expect are management. Now look, a lot of people when they first get into the real estate game, they say, I'll manage the property myself. That's totally fine. You can certainly do that. And frankly, if you're just getting started, I recommend it. Manage your first property or 2 or 3, but guess what? Sooner or later, you're going to realize that your time is a heck of a lot more valuable than the 6 to 10% that you're going to pay a property manager to collect the rents, to handle service calls, to handle problems at the property, to make sure that everything is done above board and according to the law. So you got to budget for it. What's a good number? 6% is a discount property manager. That is the absolute least that you should budget in your calculations. But the likelihood is 7, 8, 9% is probably a good number that you can put into that calculation and feel safe that you're going to be able to find a quality management team to be able to manage the property. Okay? What other expenses? There's capital expenses that go along as you maintain the property. A good example of a capital expense, you've got a roof. In Philadelphia, a flat roof is going to cost you about $2,500. Okay? The lifespan of that roof, if it's well maintained, is about 15 years. So in order to find your annual capital expense for a new roof, take $2,500 divided by 15 years, and there's your annual expense. You've got the same thing for your kitchen, your bathroom, your plumbing system, electrical system, heating system, your windows, your paint. You know, there's different capital expenses that go along with maintaining that property. All right, you gotta keep that in the calculation. The last thing is the vacancy rate. So a lot of times you will see a national average and they'll say, okay, well, we're going to use 5% as the vacancy rate. Well, look, 5% is approximately 1/2 a month a year, okay? 1/2 a month every year that place is vacant. Well, here's the question, how long is a tenant usually going to stay? I know that some of my properties, they turn over every single year. Others, like I said, I got a tenant that's there 10 years. The vacancy rate's really, really low for that property. On average, you ought to anticipate a tenant turning over about every 2 years. In some areas, if you've got a multi-unit they're small units, the vacancy rate's going to be higher. The tenants are going to be a lot more transient. They're going to turn over. If you've got a bread and butter, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in the suburbs, you're probably going to attract more of a family type atmosphere, and the tenant's typically going to stay a little bit longer, right? So depending on the type of property, and you'll have to kind of look at a track record, you're going to have to include a vacancy rate. How long does it take to lease? All that kind of stuff. On a horror story type situation, let's say you have a tenant that moves in and a year out, they move out of the property. It takes you a month, because you're fixing up yourself, a month to go and fix up the property, another month to lease it. Well, you lost 2 months out of the next 12. I mean, that's what, 16, 18% vacancy rate? That's a huge vacancy rate. That's a lot of money that you're losing on the cash flow. So you have to account for that when you're budgeting. All right? Number 4, after you know your income and your expenses, stick to your numbers. We do the numbers first, and then we stick to them, right? If you know that you want to make $200 a month net from a property, and you're looking at your numbers and you say, well, I'm going to make $150 a month or $100 a month after my principal and insurance and all that kind of stuff and all of my expenses, hey, that's a great situation. But it's not what your targeted goal is. So move on to the next property. You want to look at the numbers that you're projecting and your goals and what you're trying to accomplish, and then analyze the property against it. Don't then go back and start tweaking your numbers. Oh, well, maybe my vacancy rate won't be, won't be 10%. It'll be 5%. And maybe my maintenance expenses will be lower than expected. I'm not even going to put that into the calculation. Well, guess what? Sooner or later, that's going to blow up in your face. Stick to your numbers. That's number 4. Now, number 5 is really easy. After you've done all this due diligence, you've gone through and defined your goals, you learned the market, you know your income and expenses, and you've found a property that meets your goals, all your numbers are right. Hey, the last part is don't be afraid to execute. So many people, they get into this game of real estate investing as a educational program or a social event. Going to all the networking events and things like that. Hey, that's a great part of this community, to be able to interact with some really great people. But that's not the goal. The goal is to build wealth, to build cash flow, to put some money back in your pocket, and to build a nice portfolio. So when you're doing that and you find the right property, pull the trigger. Don't be afraid. Go in, buy that first property, go through the process, and hey, it'll work out, it won't work out, whatever, but at least you're going to get the experience and the hands-on, and eventually you're going to have a great portfolio that's going to continually produce the type of returns that you want. All right, so thank you so much for joining me for today's video. Again, this is Lazy Landlord Reboot number 7. I wish you the best of luck in your real estate investing, and I can't wait to see you again soon.